Hello and welcome to the College Access Evidence Matrix Interventions to Support Post-Secondary Transitions webinar. We have several facilitators here to lead our webinar. My name is Stephanie Suarez, and also with us today are my colleagues Jill Marcus, Jessica Mislevy, and Neil Sefter from REL Appalachia. Today's event is part of the Regional Educational Laboratory Program administered by the U.S. Department of Education, Institute of Education Sciences. The 10 regional educational laboratories, or RELs, work in partnership with stakeholders to conduct applied research and trainings. The mission of the REL program is to support a more evidence-based education system. In the Appalachia region, we partner with a variety of state and local stakeholders in Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia to work on several education-related issues, including improving post-secondary transitions, early literacy using data and evidence across states, and more. Today's webinar is part of our Post-Secondary Transitions Partnership in Virginia. For more information about the projects we're working on, we encourage you to visit the REL Appalachia website. Let's start by reviewing our agenda. We began with a welcome and introductions. Next, we will orient you to the resource we're here to share, the College Access Evidence Matrix, and demonstrate how to use it and how the evidence you found may apply in your setting and with the population of students you serve. Since this is an interactive webinar, you will have an opportunity to engage in an activity in which you get to use the evidence matrix. Before we conclude, we'll be sharing some additional resources. We'll post these to the REL Appalachia website, along with a recording of this webinar and some short tutorial videos on using the evidence matrix. This webinar is intended to be interactive. Several times throughout the webinar, you'll be invited to pause the recording and complete an activity independently. And now I'll pass it on to my colleague, Jessica.
Thanks, Stephanie. Before we get into the details of the evidence matrix, let's take a step back and reflect on why evidence matters. I think it's safe to say that you're here today because you want to help students complete high school and successfully transition into post-secondary education or training programs. Well, using, generating, and sharing evidence about effective strategies to support students can increase the likelihood of that success. Before you adopt a program or practice and invest time and resources in it, you want to know whether it has worked, for whom, and in what settings, and whether it's likely to work for your students too. When we talk about evidence, we mean that there's at least one completed high-quality research study that has proven the intervention to be effective in leading to the desired outcome from students. We've all heard great ideas from other educators who can tell success stories, but anecdotal evidence is not the same thing as evidence supported by research, since the latter relies on scientific methods to show a high probability of benefits to students. Also, if you read about a study, but the source does not verify the rigor of evidence, you can't be certain that the findings are valid. So, for example, you want to be sure that the study had more than just a handful of participants. You need to trust that the research was deemed to be well-designed and well-implemented by experts before you can believe the findings. And we also need to be cautious of any motives behind a recommendation. Recommendations could be steered by things like profit-seeking. We've all seen the great, seemingly research-based claims in some advertisements. It's better to make sure that the research was independently conducted and/or objectively reviewed by third-party experts. The Every Student Succeeds Act provides a definition of what it means to be evidence-based. In 2015, Congress passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, replacing No Child Left Behind as the main federal law governing K-12 education. ESSA emphasizes the use of evidence-based interventions, that is, programs and practices that have proven to be effective in leading to desired outcomes for students. ESSA also ties categories of federal funding to evidence. For example, education leaders are required to use evidence-based practices and improvement plans for low-performing schools. And some competitive federal grant programs also require or have a competitive preference priority for use of evidence-based interventions. ESSA defines levels or tiers of evidence that indicate the rigor or strength of evidence associated with various interventions. This image details ESSA's 4 tiers of evidence, ranging from strong at the top to moderate to promising to simply demonstrates a rationale. The main difference between each tier is the type of study that was conducted. The more rigorous the type of study, the higher the tier. These ratings are helpful to you when you're looking at evidence. The higher the rating, the more confident you can be that the intervention improves student outcomes. In addition to the design of the study, the ESSA evidence rating also depends on how the students and setting in the study overlap with those in the district or school considering the intervention. The overlap requirement helps you understand in which settings and for which students the intervention has worked, and if it's likely to work in your context too. ESSA Tier 1 evidence requires overlap in both sample and setting, whereas ESSA Tier 2 evidence requires overlap in sample or setting. The College Access Evidence Matrix is an informational resource that can help you select relevant evidence-based interventions, or the blue step 2 of the decision-making framework you see here. The matrix summarizes and organizes information from the What Works Clearinghouse, or WWC, and serves as an easy-to-use, topically focused resource for college access providers and education leaders to identify relevant interventions for post-secondary transition. For those who may not already be familiar, the WWC is an initiative of the U.S. of Education's Institute of Education Sciences that identifies existing research on educational interventions and assesses the quality of the research based on rigorous standards. The WWC also identifies studies that meet ESSA requirements for the top 2 tiers of evidence. Here is a screenshot of a portion of the College Access Evidence Matrix. You can find the link to the evidence matrix in the video description below. You may want to take a look at it now as we go through what it contains, or you may want to wait until later in the session when you will have time to dig into the information. One way you can use the matrix is to answer questions about what the research says about the effectiveness of particular interventions. For example, what does the research say about the effectiveness of dual enrollment programs for improving college readiness? Or what does the research say about whether linked learning communities have an impact on college persistence? You can also use the matrix to answer questions about what kinds of interventions have been shown to have an impact on the outcome of interest. So for example, what interventions have been proven effective for increasing college credit accumulation and persistence? Or what interventions have been proven effective for promoting academic achievement in high school? Let's take a closer look at what the matrix contains. The columns of the evidence matrix provide outcome domains defined by the WWC that are relevant to post-secondary transitions, such as completing high school or enrolling in college. These outcome domains are organized by education level and span the post-secondary transition space all the way from middle school academic achievement to employment and labor market outcomes. The rows of the evidence matrix provide interventions that have been rigorously studied and have been proven to improve one or more post-secondary transition outcomes, such as accelerated pathway programs, dual enrollment programs, and career academies. In the matrix, some of the squares are purple and marked Tier 1, some are blue and marked Tier 2, and some are empty. The cells of the evidence matrix indicate the highest ESSA evidence level, Tier 1 or Tier 2, demonstrated by the intervention in an outcome domain as determined by the WWC. So if you look at the studies for an intervention that is marked as Tier 1, there may also be studies with evidence of Tier 2 or even lower ratings as well. If a box is empty, it means that for the intervention, there is no Tier 1 or Tier 2 evidence of effectiveness from studies reviewed by the WWC for the outcome listed. That could be because the intervention hasn't been studied, or that the WWC hasn't reviewed the study of it, or that the WWC determined that the research did not meet the criteria for ESSA Tier 1 or Tier 2 evidence. I'd also like to note, for those who may be using a screen reader to navigate the matrix, the screen reader will read the blank cells as NA or not applicable. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jill.
Thanks, Jessica, for that introduction to the matrix. So the evidence matrix was designed for 3 types of users: college access program developers seeking new evidence-based strategies to try, program directors needing to demonstrate the evidence base for their approach, and educational leaders making decisions about programs to offer to their students. Let's take a look at the kinds of questions these users may have and that they could use the matrix to help answer. The matrix can help you think about new interventions to try depending on the outcome you are interested in. For example, if you're a college access program developer, maybe you wonder whether it's worth it to add parent engagement activities into the mix. Or maybe you want to look for new, promising evidence-based ideas for your program that are likely to increase college access and enrollment. Let's say you are a program director. You might want to know if an intervention like summer counseling has been shown to be effective for college readiness. Or you might want to know what interventions other than summer counseling have been shown to be effective for increasing college readiness. If you are an education leader, you might want to look into what post-secondary transition interventions also improve high school academic achievement. Or you might be curious about the likely impact of dual enrollment programs and whether they have been shown to help students stay in school. Here are a few of the interventions and outcomes listed in the matrix. Take a moment to consider anything you are curious about that the matrix might help you learn more about. For example, you might wonder, has summer counseling been shown to affect college degree attainment? Or have parent engagement projects been shown to impact college access and enrollment? What do the interventions and outcomes listed here make you curious about? Okay, next slide, please, Hannah. There we go. So let's get into the specifics of how to find the information you are looking for in the matrix. We'll walk you through how to use the matrix using 2 example scenarios. For the first one, we want to learn more about a specific intervention. Let's say you are a college advisor looking for programs that can help students succeed in college. Some colleagues mentioned that they've heard good things about a college advising program called Bottom Line. Before looking into it further, you want to know whether there is evidence that Bottom Line is effective at improving college outcomes for students. So the intervention you want to look at is Bottom Line, and the outcomes you want to look at are those related to college access and enrollment, college credit accumulation and persistence, and college degree attainment. Let's walk through the steps for finding that information. First, find the row with Bottom Line. Then use the scrolling bar, the arrow keys, or the tab key to move through the columns until you find the group that relates to college level outcomes. You'll see that Bottom Line, has demonstrated ESSA Tier 1 evidence for the outcome domains of college access and enrollment, as well as college credit accumulation and persistence. But 2 of the boxes are blank or read as the screen reader as NA. So we know that Bottom Line has not demonstrated Tier 1 or Tier 2 evidence of college general academic achievement or degree attainment. Remember, this could be because the available studies reviewed by the WWC as of July 2021 may not have tested one of those outcomes, or that the Tier 1 or Tier 2 evidence criteria weren't met. So that was our first example, and we'll do another one, and it will get easier. In this next scenario, we'll begin by looking at the outcomes listed across the top of the matrix. So you are a college access program developer who works with urban high schools, and you want to see what kinds of interventions have strong or Tier 1 or moderate tier 2 evidence of effectiveness for college access and enrollment for students like yours. So the outcome you want to look at is college access and enrollment. You will be looking to see which interventions have tier 1 or tier 2 evidence for that outcome domain. Eventually, you will want to know the characteristics of the settings and populations that were studied to see if they were students like yours. And we will be talking about how to determine that in a bit. But as a first step, let's find which interventions have tier 1 or tier 2 evidence of effectiveness for college access and enrollment. We'll walk through the steps for finding that information now. To begin, find the column for college access and enrollment outcomes. The screenshot shows only the top of the matrix, but if you scrolled down through the whole matrix, you would see that there are 15 interventions in all with tier 1 evidence of effectiveness and 3 with tier 2 evidence of effectiveness in the outcome domain of college access and enrollment. One of the interventions from that list that had tier 1 evidence for college access and enrollment was bottom line. Let's use bottom line as an example for how to find additional information about the studies the ESSA evidence ratings are based on, including the settings where the studies took place and the characteristics of the people who were studied. To learn more about an intervention, you can read the brief description in column B. And then you can click the links to the individual studies. We will talk more about the WWC in a moment. The image here is just to give you an idea of what you can see when you click the study link. We will look at one together in detail soon. Sometimes the evidence is based on just one study, as in this example. Sometimes there are several studies, and we included the links to the WWC review for each study. In the search we just did, we found 15 interventions with either tier 1 or tier 2 evidence for college access and enrollment. You will want to explore each of the relevant interventions using the same process of clicking through to the studies to learn more about each one. To support your use of the matrix, I want to point out that there are several other supporting tabs, which you will see at the bottom when you have it open. Along with an introduction tab that describes the purpose of the matrix and how to use it, the Legend tab provides detailed definitions and criteria for the tier 1 and tier 2 evidence level ratings. On the FAQ tab, you will find answers to several common questions about the matrix, such as, what does it mean to be evidence-based? What if the intervention I am interested in is not listed in the matrix? And what limitations are important to keep in mind when using the matrix? The References tab provides links and details about all the studies that underlie the ratings presented in the matrix. And finally, the Procedures tab provides details on how we identified the appropriate studies reviewed by the WWC and how we compiled that evidence. So now I will turn it over to Neil, who will walk you through how to check to see if the participants in the study you are looking at are similar to the population that you work with.
Thanks, Jill. So far in the 2 examples of how to use the matrix, we walked you through how to find whether there is tier 1 or tier 2 evidence for a range of outcomes for each of the interventions that are listed. Then we showed you how to click through to the supporting studies so that you could get more details about what was done and what was learned. However, it is also important to answer a couple of questions to assess the applicability of that evidence to your situation. To know if an intervention is likely to be successful for your population and in your setting, you need to see if the populations and settings that were studied are similar to yours. To determine the study sample and setting, you will need to use the What Works Clearinghouse by following the hyperlinks in the evidence matrix to the WWC's corresponding study reviews. For example, if your goal is to help rural students enroll in college, you will want to know if the studies examined how the interventions worked in rural settings. Or if you're interested in the college academic achievement for English learner students, you will want to see the extent to which English learner students were represented in the study samples. Remember that overlap impacts the ESSA rating too. If there is not overlap for sample and setting, the ESSA Tier 1 evidence level is not applicable for you. That is, if you want to make the claim that an intervention you are using in your setting and with your population has Tier 1 evidence, you can only make that claim if the characteristics of the population studied overlap with the characteristics of your population, and the setting it was studied in overlaps with your setting as well. For Tier 2, either the sample or the setting has to overlap. If neither the sample nor setting from the study overlaps with yours, an intervention labeled as Tier 1 or Tier 2 in the matrix or on the WWC website would only meet Tier 3 evidence in your context. Let's walk through an example together to practice finding this information. Let's say you want to know more about the evidence for bottom line, specifically whether it has been tested in settings and with students who are similar to yours. You will want to consider student characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, and financial means. You will also want to learn more about whether the intervention was tested in a setting like yours, which may be urban, suburban, or rural, and may have other unique characteristics. In the matrix, clicking on the link in column O titled WW Study Review Link 1 for that intervention will bring you to the WWC's review of a 2017 study on bottom line by Barr and Castleman. The Review Details tab comes up first when you land on the web page, with a box that highlights that this study has ESSA Tier 1 evidence. Notice that there is a tab for sample characteristics where you can find information about the population that was studied. The Sample Characteristics tab gives you some information about the study sample and setting. In this example, the study was conducted in urban areas of Massachusetts and New York with a sample that was 70% female, 30% male, 23% Asian, 33% Black, 32% Hispanic, and 68% not Hispanic. You can also click on the Study Details tab to see additional information. In this case, the study's detail provides helpful information, including the names of the cities where the study was conducted and details about family income and first-generation status. This intervention, bottom line, has only one study that shows Tier 1 or Tier 2 evidence. Other interventions may have more studies, and you would want to repeat this process for each one. The WWC does not provide specific criteria about how much overlap is needed. However, this information should allow you to compare the study sample and setting to your own and make a judgment as to whether there is sufficient overlap. If the matrix lists Tier 1 evidence and the population and setting overlap with yours, then the Tier 1 rating applies in your context, and you can be more confident that the intervention is also likely to work in your setting with the students you serve. Now I'll turn it back over to Jill to guide you through an activity.
Thanks, Neil. Right, so here is an activity for you to try. There are two use case scenarios shown here that you can work with on your own. In the first one, you are the principal of an urban high school that serves a large percentage of students of color and are considering offering your seniors additional summer counseling supports to increase their likelihood of applying to and enrolling in college. You would like to know if summer counseling interventions have strong evidence, that's ESSA Tier 1, for college access and enrollment. In the second one, you are a college access program developer operating in a northeastern city who is seeking new evidence-based strategies with strong evidence to improve college access and enrollment for your students, most of whom are facing socioeconomic barriers. So let's look at each one, and then you can pause the recording while you work with the matrix to find the information needed. Pause now and see if you can find the answers to the questions for scenario A. When you restart the recording, we will read through the answers to these questions. Okay, welcome back. For question 1, What level of evidence is there for summer counseling's effectiveness for college access and enrollment? Did you find the answer? Tier 1. It has been designated as Tier 1 or ESSA strong evidence because there's at least one study that met WWC standards without reservations. It found a statistically significant positive effect of the intervention on a student outcome, and it was based on a large multi-site sample. Specifically, the evidence for summer counseling programs comes from one study from 2014 conducted by Castleman and colleagues. If you clicked the link for that study and found the sample characteristics tab, then you found the answer to question 2. What can you find out about the setting and population that was studied? The answer is 58% female, 43% Black, 13% Hispanic, suburban and urban, Georgia and Massachusetts, etc. And 85% of the Boston sample completed the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, and so forth. For question 3, how would you justify whether the ESSA evidence rating for this intervention applies in this scenario's context? That is, in an urban high school with a large percentage of students of color. To answer that, you would assert your own judgments as to whether this overlap in sample and settings is sufficient, and then provide your rationale. Okay, pause again and see if you can find the answers to the questions for scenario B. When you restart the recording, we'll read through the answers to these questions. Okay, welcome back. Did you find the answer to question 1? What is the first intervention listed that has ESSA Tier 1 evidence for college access and enrollment? The answer is the Accelerated Study in Associates Programs, ASAP. I'd just like to mention that the matrix does not have to be sorted alphabetically when you're using it on your own. And in fact, we encourage you to take steps to avoid biasing interventions based on where they appear in the alphabet. For our example, we're looking at ASAP, which is a 3-year program that's designed to remove barriers to college success and completion for students seeking associate degrees. ASAP offers students financial supports, academic supports, and personal supports. ASAP students are required to enroll full-time and are encouraged to take any required developmental education courses in the first semester. Question 2 was, what is the title of the 3rd study for this intervention? And we gave you a hint for where to find it in column Q. So the answer is, the study is called Doubling Graduation Rates, 3-year effects of CUNY's Accelerated Study in Associate Programs, ASAP, for developmental education students. And it was conducted by Scrivener and colleagues. Question 3 was, what can you say about the population and setting of Scrivener and colleagues' 2015 study? If you click the study and went to the sample characteristics tab, you found the answer. 9% ELL, 62% female, 34% Black, urban, etc. And you also found that 60% were incoming freshmen and 88% received a Pell Grant, etc. Question 4 was, how would you justify whether the Tier 1 ESSA rating from this study applies in your context? That is, in a northeastern city for students who face socioeconomic barriers. To answer that, you'd need to click the Study Details tab, where you'd find that the Scrivener study was conducted with 3 community colleges in New York City. Nearly 9 in 10 of the students in the study sample received a Pell Grant, which is an indicator of socioeconomic status. You would then assert your own judgments as to whether this overlap in sample and settings is sufficient and provide your rationale. So I hope you found these exercises helpful and engaging. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica, who will share some additional resources.
Thanks, Jill. Now we'd like to share additional resources to support your use of the evidence matrix. First, we want to share an infographic developed by our colleagues at REL Midwest that goes into more detail about ESSA evidence levels than we did today, available at the link you see on the slide. REL Midwest also has a short video entitled Understanding ESSA Tiers of Evidence that goes with the infographic, available at the link shown on the slide. And while we spent our time today talking about the evidence base for interventions, it's also important to take contextual factors such as local capacity into account in selecting and implementing interventions. Just because a program has strong evidence for your students and setting, it's still only likely to work if you have the capacity and supports in place to implement the program as the developer intended. Our colleagues at REL West developed a 4-page infographic, 2 of which you see on the slide, titled Applicability of Evidence-Based Interventions, that contains questions to consider about whether an evidence-based intervention is a good fit for a given context. For example, is the program feasible to administer given the staff you have available in your school or the technologies you have available in your school? And you can find this resource at the link listed on the slide.
All right, so we are going to go ahead and wrap up now. To recap today's session, we explored why evidence matters, what ESSA evidence levels are, and how the College Access Evidence Matrix organizes and consolidates information from the WWC that is specific to post-secondary transitions. We did this to answer questions about the effectiveness of a particular intervention or the kinds of interventions proven to impact particular outcomes, and the importance of checking for overlap between your population and the one studied. The evidence matrix was developed with and for our REL Appalachia partners at the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia, Virginia Community College System, and the Virginia Department of Education, along with several Virginia-based college access program leaders. We wanted to thank the individuals you see here for their partnership and invaluable contributions. Thank you so much for joining us today. We encourage you to stay in touch with us to learn more about REL Appalachia and our resources. We hope you have a great rest of your day.